everyone. I'm Larry Kudlow. This is the Kudlow Report. Gun controls are coming, whether we like it or not. But this cannot be done by executive decree, as Vice President Biden suggested today. Congress must vote. And then again, a full court press on guns has now apparently put Walmart into the conversation. Now, to talk about all this, let's bring in our panel. We have Karen Finney, columnist for The Hill and former DNC communications director. We have Guy Benson, political editor for townhall.com, and Mark Simone, WOR radio talk show host. Good evening, everybody. Let me start with Guy Benson. Let me start with you. If you're talking about restricting automatic guns, if you're talking about restricting these 100-bullet magazine cartridges and so forth, you can't do that by executive fiat. You're going to have legislative changes.
Well, I totally agree with that, and you are sometimes starting to hear automatic weapons conflated with semi-automatic weapons, conflated with assault weapons. These are all terms that have distinct meanings, and I sometimes think that we get lost in the shuffle when it comes to rhetoric and some of this, the jargon that goes on. But you're 100% right, Larry. I am not a particularly doctrinaire conservative when it comes to gun-related issues. I think that any restriction has to meet a constitutional test and also the test of whether or not it'll actually remedy the problem that presents itself. But if we're going to do this, at least do it the way that Governor Cuomo is doing it, which is through the legislative process, right, rather than the way the president is attempting to do it, as he has time and again, where he finds Congress to be rather inconvenient, so he just bypasses them as if they don't exist. That's not the way we work in this country. It's not the way we should work, at least. We have a Constitution for a reason.
Karen Finney, Biden also did say that separate legislation would be required, so I want to be fair to him. And I agree with Guy. Look, I would like to see some changes made, okay? I'm willing to see some restrictions made. But I want to get your take on this, because we had a bill from 1994 to 2004 that had a lot of restrictions, including these semi-automatic guns. That bill was never extended, never. Not under George W. Bush, not under Barack Obama. Essentially, Karen, is not that bill going to have to be extended? That's going to be at the heart of this process. You can't make executive decisions alone.
Well, I think what the vice president was saying is that there's going to be a number of different ideas put on the table, and some, some folks will agree with and some others won't agree with. And we know back in 2011, not that long after Congresswoman Gabby Giffords had been shot in that horrible incident, the Justice Department again convened some meetings and did the same thing, sort of looking at what options could be done by executive order. So I think we need to be careful to separate out that the administration is going to look at what things to solve this problem can be done by executive order and what things have to be handled through the legislative process. I just want to say, though, on this issue of automatic and semi-automatic weapons, because I've talked to a number of soldiers, actually, who have mentioned that, they're shocked that the gun that they saw looked a lot like the same guns that they carry in Afghanistan. I thought General McChrystal put it very well earlier this week in making the point that, even in the semi-automatic realm, we know that those guns can be modified, which is what happened in Aurora for those 100 magazine clips.
No, I happen to agree with you, by the way. I happen to agree. I think these semi-automatics should be restricted substantially. I think these 100-bullet ammunition magazines should be restricted substantially. Mark Simone, what do you think about this? Because a lot of this is going to come to New York through Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, listen, I'm not against gun control. I don't see any civilian use for those big, crazy weapons and all those big magazines and all. So I'm not against controlling that. But to think that that solves the problem is crazy. Can't trust any politician who just proposes gun laws and then goes back to sleep. The fact that a deranged person like the one in Newtown, Connecticut, could still enter the school with a couple of handguns or a knife or an axe doesn't make me feel safe. If we're not going to talk about mental health and the important aspects of this issue, we're not solving the problem.
I want to talk about mental health. Let's stay with that right away. I don't know if this kid could ever been stopped, but this kid obviously was mentally ill. Yeah. He should have been institutionalized. And I think, Mark, I'm going to guess that with respect, now Cuomo mentioned this specifically, I hope the federal legislation deals with this too. It's got to be easier for national documentation for people that have mental illness problems and for what I'll call re-institutionalizing them. They've been out on the street for years. They need to go back into the institutions, Mark Simone. That should be part of the change.
Absolutely. We've cut the number of institutions, the funding, all that sort of stuff through the years. And that's why we just have more people like this on the streets. In China, they're having these incidents in schools with greater frequency, and they have no guns. It's being done with axes, with swords. We've got to do something about these sort of people being loose.
But Larry, I just want to point out something that both you and Mark just made a point on. If we're going to talk about the mental health component, which I absolutely believe that we should, having lived in California after Proposition 13 passed, and you had lots of mentally ill people put right back on the streets, making our streets more dangerous. What that means is when we get to these talks about spending cuts, and when states are talking about cuts, we have to be very careful what we're talking about and recognize that we may have to make those cuts, but this may be a consequence of some of those cuts if we can't then get somebody in the private sector to make up the difference.
I'll spend another buck or two to do it. But Guy Benson, let me go on to a slightly different subject on this whole matter. That is Joe Biden meeting with the NRA, which fascinates me. Guy, it tells me how smart a politician Joe Biden is. What can come out of that? Do you think he can pick up any support on anything with the NRA?
I think that it's window dressing. I think it's smart, politically savvy window dressing, but I think that the White House and the NRA have completely different goals and agendas here. But the White House will at least say, hey, look, we met with the other side. We're doing this in good faith. Whether or not it's actually in good faith, I think, remains to be seen. And by the way, one more thing. I want to go back to Governor Cuomo. And I am no fan of Governor Cuomo's, but I will once again echo what you said, Larry. Part of his package that he's introduced in New York does explicitly address the mental issue,
right.
The mental health issue, which I think actually is important. And it also toughens laws when it comes to committing crimes with weapons.
Right.
And
that's
also an important element of it.
Listen,
So,
let me just walk through. Hang on a second. Let me just walk through. 'Cause I didn't like Cuomo's State of the States. Got a lot of liberal legislation and spending in there. Karen, you'll love it. I'm going to hate it. But I do like him. I do like him on gun controls. Tighten assault weapon bans. Here's one, Mark Simone. Renew licenses every 5 years. I like that a lot. Limit large ammunition sales. I like that a lot. And much better background checks, not only for the mentally ill, but for everybody. All private sales should be strictly monitored with background checks, Mark Simone, whether it's in the state or the federal government. That is so important.
Those are all great. I'm for all of those. But to think that's going to solve the problem, none of this stuff is going to cause less shootings in the street of Chicago or terrible incidents like Newtown.
Mark, you can't say that. You don't know that that's true. I mean, how can you possibly say that? If some of the, I mean, if some of the shootings that have happened over the last couple of years, if some of those individuals had not had access to high-capacity magazines, like in Aurora, Colorado, where even the police had no way of knowing that they had someone in their community amassing large numbers of weapons, of gas, and the kinds of things that we now know he booby-trapped his apartment with, as well as ammunition. They had no way, if they had had some way of knowing that, hey, there's this guy, he seems to be ordering all of this stuff, that seems
Karen,
odd. How do you know that wouldn't have prevented something?
I suppose it would be great if he had a lesser weapon, like just a handgun or a homemade bomb, but you're still going to have this nut in there, and you still have death.
But the point, so we should do nothing? I mean, Mark, the counter to what you're saying is basically that this one thing won't solve the problem, so let's do nothing. But the point is, we're going to have to do a number of things.
We can't just stop at gun laws. We've got to do more than that. Gun laws alone aren't enough.
And that's what everybody's saying. Everybody, I mean, that's what the whole conversation has been.
But Guy,
everything from mental health
Guy, I'll say this. Just get my 2 cents back into this. I'm for handguns. I'm for concealed handguns. I'm from rifles. I'm from all manner of hunting and shotguns and things of that nature. It's the semi-automatic stuff and these 100-bullet ammunition things that bother the heck out of me, Guy. Well, that's what scares me. And I do think the background check documentation for both the mentally ill or anybody buying a gun is deficient. I think the computer systems, the algorithms can be completely changed and must be changed.
But, Larry, I think it's important to point out that many, many handguns and many rifles are semi-automatic already and have been. Most Americans think of semi-automatic and they think, oh, wow, it must be this big military-style gun. But, in fact, a lot of everyday guns are already semi-automatic. I'd also point out to Karen, hang on, Karen, I think you make an interesting point, but it's also worth addressing the fact that some of the locations and jurisdictions with the most stringent gun laws have the highest gun violence rate and murder rate. And finally, Larry, on this renewing every 5 years the license thing, I'm not 100% sure why you do that, and I do worry about the implications that has for totally law-abiding gun owners. Well, why should they have to do it every 5 years?
That one's going to be controversial. All right, let's just stay with us. Karen, Guy, and Mark, going to stick around. we got to check in with you on a number of topics this evening. Meanwhile, President Obama's new cabinet appointees are starting to show a major shift to the left. That's my view, okay? Let's start with Chuck Hagel replacing Leon Panetta. I fear Hagel is going to dismantle the whole Department of Defense. We're talking about Jack Lew, who is certainly further to the left than Tim Geithner. Mr. Lew's a government lifer. He got his start with Tip O'Neill. and dovish John Kerry, well to the left of Hillary Clinton, who was always regarded as rather hawkish as a senator. Now Hilda Solis is resigning as Labor Secretary. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, is the president's really moving even further to the left in his second term, not a centrist? Let's bring back our panel. Karen Finney, columnist for The Hill, Guy Benson at townhall.com, and radio host Mark Zanone. Guy, I think these appointments, all three of them, particularly Hagel at defense, show a move to the left. What's your take?
Sure. I mean, of course they do. The president's a lefty. I mean, that's who he is. And now that he never has to face voters again, I think we'll see his administration drift even further to the left. I do see the Liu appointment at least as an opportunity for Republicans to highlight the fact that we have not had a federal budget in almost 4 years, and it is 100% the fault of Democrats. A lot of Americans don't know that. The Liu confirmation hearings at least give Republicans and Jeff Sessions and guys like that a chance to really beat that drum. And one other thing, Larry, I'm interested to see the Labor Department pick with Solis on her way out. I think that if you look at labor unions, they're still licking their wounds a little bit over Wisconsin and what happened in Michigan. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the White House to put a very hard left person in that position. We'll see who it is.
Yeah, Karen, they'll probably put the head of the AFL-CIO in the Labor Department.
Yeah.
Just go right ahead. Just go right ahead and be done with it.
Maybe they had a PBS, right? No, come on, guys. I mean, I'm not surprisingly.
What's PBS? Oh, you mean Big Bird. I got
exactly.
you. No, but seriously, Labor Department, Guy has a good point. They're going to put some rampant pro-labor person in there.
Oh, my goodness, that would just be horrible. No, I mean, let's wait and see. I mean, and as to the, I mean, remember that Jack Lew will also, during those confirmation hearings, remind people of a time when he worked for President Bill Clinton, when we had a time of surpluses that then were turned into deficits by Republicans. So if we're going to play that game, Guy, like, let's make sure we tell the whole story.
And why didn't they put in Erskine Bowles? Erskine Bowles was Erskine Bowles did the deal.
But he was on your show and said he didn't want to do it. I've known Erskine Bowles since he was chief of staff at the White House. He didn't want to do it.
I'm just saying, if you're going to go back to Clinton, you got to go back to Herb Bowles. Yes, Herb Bowles said on this show and elsewhere he didn't want to be Treasury Secretary, but I didn't see Mr. Obama try to twist his arm at all.
Well, you don't. We don't know that.
And the point is, there's no centrist.
We don't know that, and we can't know that.
There's not a single centrist in this group. Chuck Hagel's not a centrist. He's not going to be. He's going to dismantle the Department of Defense.
But here's the problem with this conversation that we have about the Department of Defense. You know, it always amounts to size, and I know guys like to talk about size, but what about what is an effective use of dollars for the military that we need now? Because if you even talk to guys who are, you know, boots on the ground, some of the money that gets spent by the bureaucracy of the Department of Defense isn't doing what they need it to be doing. So I think a guy who was an infantryman who fought in a war, I think actually may have a better sense of what do we really need to be doing to make sure that we are building the Army and have the capacities and the Navy and what have you, the armed forces that we need for today, not yesterday.
Mark Simone, you think these cabinet appointments show him moving, Obama moving center or left?
Clearly to the left, and he has every right to move to the left. That's where he is. He's entitled to do that. But I see it as a move to real mediocrity. 320 million people in this country, and Chuck Hagel and John Kerry is the best we can do. This is just the mediocre characters. Lew, the same. He's in the State Department. He's in the Treasury Department. He's just bouncing around from one end of government to the other. We can do much better than this in the private sector.
Lew, you're so right, Mark. You make this point. Lew is a lifer. Actually, he started out working for a left-wing Massachusetts Democrat named Moakley, I think, in the 70s. Then he went on to Tip O'Neill. He was a star in Tip O'Neill. Bless his soul, but he was a lefty. And, you know, here he is, as you say, bouncing around the Obama administration, and now he's got the Treasury Department, which is a serious agency, but not a left-wing agency, Mark Simone. He's got to deal with G20 bankers around the world. I don't think he can do it.
No, these are not guys I would trust with $1 trillion coin in their pocket. This is crazy.
I don't think I trust anybody with $1 trillion coin in their pocket.
We're going to do this. We got to do this platinum coin later. We guys, it's too much. But you guys hang with me for a while. Mark, Karen, and Guy, you all coming back. Earlier today, White House Press Secretary Jay Carney was repeatedly asked direct questions about the possibility of creating a $1 trillion platinum coin to swoop in and somehow save America from a debt ceiling crisis. His answer? Well, it's not yes, but shockingly, it's not a no either. Please take a listen.
You can speculate about a lot of things, but nothing needs to come to these kinds of, you know, speculative notions about how to deal with a problem that is easily resolved by Congress doing its job.
All right. Well, Congress should do its job. That was kind of a non-denial denial from Jay Carney. But question is, does this mean there's really a $1 trillion platinum coin on the table? God. Our ace political panel, Karen Finney, Guy Benson, Mark Simone. Guy Benson, you wrote about this. This is the worst idea I have ever seen. This is a third world banana republic idea which will destroy our currency, destroy our credit rating, and make us the laughingstock of the world.
No, Larry, you got this all wrong. I have a little bit of an irreverent take on this. I'm all for this coin. As a matter of fact, look, we already have Washington politicians engaged in the theater of the absurd when it comes to our debt problems. So why not go the full Monty? In fact, let's take it a step farther. Let's mint 17 of these puppies, create a magical surplus. Imagine the investments for our children, Larry, we can make with a fanciful surplus with 17 magic bean-style coins. On a more serious note, I think that it takes a lot to get the American public's attention when it comes to the debt issue and how serious it really is and how immediate it's going to be sooner than we'd like to think. The absolute outlandish insanity of this idea is maybe just enough to get people to wake up and say, hang on, what the hell is going on in Washington right now, and who's actually trying to fix the problem? Because that's what we have to do. None of these ridiculous gimmicks.
Guy, my friend, I love you, but that is the most tortured logic I have heard in quite some time. Mark Simone, would you buy a platinum coin for $1 trillion? Just right off the top. Me, your buddy, I offer you a platinum coin. I say take $1 trillion. You buy that?
From you, I might trust it, but this has got to stop. I thought the Carter administration was crazy with odd, even gas lines and double-digit inflation. Now, in this administration, we're talking about fiscal cliffs, debt ceiling, and now $1 trillion coin. I mean, this calls for guys in white jackets and a net to take us away. This is out of control. It's got to stop. Whose picture would you put on a coin like that?
Karen Finney, this is a Democratic idea.
Oh, now come on, Larry. It's a ridiculous idea. Now, Larry,
good.
I was going to say for once, or actually this may be the second time, I absolutely agree with you that this is the most ridiculous idea I have ever heard. But also not just because we'd be the laughingstock of the world, and sadly at this point I think we're about the strongest economy in the world right about now. But also, I mean, think about that. I mean, to Guy's point, whether or not it gets people's attention, and I think the polls show that people are paying attention to how broken Washington is. But more importantly, what does that say to the American people? Basically, that says that the people that you elect to go to Washington to do a job can't do their job, so they're just going to make up some new rules.
Yeah.
And so I think it erodes confidence in our government. It's such a ridiculous idea.
Well, the other thing, Karen, I think you're absolutely right. And the other important point to recall from 2011 is we got downgraded by S&P not because we didn't raise the debt ceiling. We did. It's because of the lack of seriousness in tackling the problems. And a $1 trillion coin, I think, exhibits the ultimate lack of seriousness.
But this administration sometimes gets people's attention in the wrong ways, through class warfare, through playing on people's greed. You know, we've got this mentality of now, ask only what your country can do for you. And many will think if this is possible, that we ought to go just do these sort of things.
You know, you can't, by the way, I could spend time in the weeds telling you why legally you can't do this, why the Federal Reserve does not buy assets from the mint. The mint prints dollar bills to replace old dollar bills. That's all they do. And the mint can't create coins for the Treasury Department. And by the way, none of this stuff is legal tender. But that's
and it's never going to happen anyway.
And it's never going to happen. Okay, so I'll ask you a question, Karen Finney. Let's just stay with this. Instead of this stupid coin idea, instead of this utterly stupid Banana Republic coin idea, why don't we get serious and start cutting spending? In fact, why don't we get A, a budget out of the Senate Democrats for the first time in 4 years, and B, implementation of the across-the-board spending sequester, which might do some good for the country and its credibility.
How about instead, let's have, because the only way we move forward on any of those things is if everybody sits down at the table and everybody is willing to negotiate. I mean, again, when we talk about last year, when we talk about this year, I'm sorry, guys, but the Republicans have been the ones who have been the most unwilling to bend, to put anything on the table. And we can't have a conversation about spending cuts, as the president has said, without having a conversation about revenue.
Well, we just did that.
If we're going to talk
what are you talking about?
No. We basically just said we took one piece off the table. That doesn't solve the whole problem. And I think if we're going to have a conversation about the whole problem, then we need to be honest about the whole problem and put it all on the table.
Let's be honest about one thing. The solution to out-of-control spending is to figure out how to stop it, not how to pay for it. It's how to stop it.
Well, but again, I think personally, I think that the whole conversation about the budget is flawed in that, again, it goes to big versus small when it should be about what is effective versus what is ineffective. If there are programs that are ineffective or things that aren't working or places where they're fat, absolutely we should look at cuts to those places. But instead, we get locked in this conversation about big versus small and trying to make some arbitrary number rather than saying what is it to make these programs, what does an effective government look like? That's the conversation we should be having.
This current spending level, you agree, is too high?
I agree that we need to have a rational conversation about what effective government looks like and what spending that requires.
Yeah, but to have a discussion about the budget, it requires having a budget, which we haven't had in 4 years. Step one, bottom line.
Well, but I mean, the Republicans in the House have passed budgets that they've sent over to the Senate, knowing
they've
that
done their job.
Even Republicans in the Senate wouldn't vote for. So come on, guy. I mean, that's a little bit of a false charge.
No, the 95% of Senate Republicans voted for the Senate for the Republican budget out of the House, which they were required to do by law, and they did it.
All right, I got to leave it there. We're going to get Karen some platinum-colored earrings to go with her outfit. Looks like $1 million. Not $1 trillion, $1 million. Karen Finney, Guy Benson, Mark Simone. Thanks, everybody. I'm Larry Kudlow. That's this evening's show. We'll see you tomorrow night.